Welcome. My name is Emma Rathie. I'm the manager of programs and exhibition production here at the George Eastman Museum in Rochester, New York. And just thank you for choosing to spend your hour with us. We really, really appreciate it. So let's start with some housekeeping. Closed captioning and live transcription is available. You're able to enable this function on your Zoom toolbar. If you have questions today during the presentation, you can please use the Q&A function. This should be at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on which device you're using today. Our chat should also be on. We aren't monitoring this for questions, but feel free to pop in and say hello or where you're from in the chat. We are also recording today's talk, and we'll put this on our YouTube channel a little bit later. So come back to it. You can revisit this lecture as needed. You can share with your friends, and you can also find previous public programs on our YouTube channel. I also, there we go. Also, I want to express that now more than ever, individual giving helps to sustain the George Eastman Museum's stability and future success. Donations help the museum to continue to offer free programming like today's In Focus lecture. So if you'd like to contribute or find out more information about supporting the museum, please scan the QR code or click the URL in the chat box below. But let's get on to some fun stuff. For those who haven't attended an In Focus lecture before, this series is about highlighting the different projects we work on at the museum. Many of the things we do happen behind the scenes, so this allows our internal staff to kind of lift the veil a little bit. For today's lecture, we will be talking about the challenges of film reconstruction. Silent films seldom survive in their complete form. Some of George Eastman Museum's most renowned restorations have been reconstructed from multiple sources. Currently, the museum is restoring the westerns of the great William S. Hart. To bring 9 titles as close to possible to their original look, 44 elements from 8 archives has had to be accessed. These include 35mm nitrate prints, foreign release versions on fragile diacetate stock, bootlegged 16mm copies, and even obsolete formats such as 28mm or paper prints. Putting the jigsaw puzzle together is a challenge, especially when there is no roadmap. And also some of the decisions that are being made are bound to be a little bit subjective, so there are sacrifices that are made here. Film reconstruction is also not bound to silent cinema. But today, you'll be hearing all of this from Moving Image Department Senior Curator Peter Bagrov and Preservation Manager Anthony Labate. Looking forward, our next In Focus lecture, Lost Films Found, is Saturday, May 10th. This will be on site at the George Eastman Museum in Rochester. The talk will explore the world of lost films, what they are, how they're found, and what happens once they reach an archive. This talk will be given by Kirk McDowell, our Associate Collection Manager in the Moving Image Department. Without taking any more time, I'm going to pass it to Anthony and Peter. And you can share your screen now, Anthony.
Hey, thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Emma, and hello, everyone. Let's look at the first image. Here it is. So we will mainly pick examples from our own practice, but I would like to highlight that the challenges that we are facing are faced by our colleagues all over the world, in the United States and in foreign archives, and we all collaborate and we all discuss and we all trying to find the right solution, and we do not always all agree, sometimes even within the department, within the museum. The one important thing is when people talk about film restoration, the usual thing you would see is one of those images before and after. Everything is scratched and decomposed on the left side and now it's clean on the right side, or it's a moving clip and everything all of a sudden becomes nice and crisp and sharp. Well, film restoration is not at all limited to that. In fact, this dirt removal and scratch removal is one of the most, frankly, boring and ungratifying parts of film restoration. One thing that is both very exciting and extremely challenging is reconstructing a film that does not survive in its original complete form. And as Emma mentioned, in the silent era, that is usually the case, unless you happen to have a pristine print with no splices, and there's a splice when something has been lost because of damage, for example, or a tear or something, or censorship. Or you have a pristine camera negative, but even a negative could be a challenge. So that's what we will focus on, trying to recreate the original look of the film from often multiple elements, and there are two things that are important to remember. That film is not just storytelling, it is a visual art. And maintaining the original look of the film, or the original sound, by the way, if it's a sound film, is as important as making sure that the storyline is all there. So with that, Anthony, why don't you start with the first example?
Sure. And there we go. So one of the first reconstruction projects that was undertaken by the George Eastman Museum back when it was the George Eastman House was The Lost World. A famous film, sort of a blueprint for King Kong a few years later. This film was produced and released through First National Pictures in 1925, and it was originally 10 reels long with an approximate running time of 108 minutes. Now, First National only had a 5-year option on the novel by Arthur Conan Doyle, and at that time, they would have to relinquish the original negative back to the Doyle estate and destroy all their prints. At the same time, the Doyle estate made a contract with the Kotoscope libraries to have abridged versions on 16 millimeter safety film to circulate. And it was for years that it was this only 50-minute abridged version was known to exist. In the 1990s, the museum wanted to restore the film. They had in their possession a fine grain master, a 35 nitrate fine grain master of that the Kodak from the Kodak Kotoscope libraries. And two of those original nitrate reels had decomposed, so they were going to have to reconstruct it using an inferior 16 millimeter acetate print. And that was what they had planned. But then they came to senior curator Chris Horak's attention that there was a longer print at the Czech Film Archive in Prague. Well, that nitrate print was sent to the museum, and when they looked at it, they realized this had many of the scenes that had been cut out to make the Kotoscope abridgment. So they had, at that time, no digital ways of doing the film. So they had to make brand new safety elements on acetate stock, new negatives, blow up the 16, and then start to edit the footage and recombine it into a longer version. So I don't know if you can really see this on your screen, the different qualities of the prints. So the fine grain master, what is sourced from that, has really great detail. It's has a very pleasing grayscale, where the 16 millimeter acetate prints were usually pretty beat up, and you could see some scratches. And with the material that was sourced from the Czech release print, there was some decomp, but at least then that film could be put together into a much longer version. So that was like a start. From before that, most of the preservations we would do were usually from one source. But now that we have our film preservation digital services, that we have these scanners, we're able to now get many more sources, digitize it all, put it into a timeline, and then start to rebuild the films. And that's what we've been doing with the William S. Hart project. And here's the list of the films that we've been currently working on.
Which we selected out of almost 30 titles that we have at the museum, because the Louis Mayer Foundation was willing to fund the restoration of as many William S. Hart films as possible. So they sent a call to many archives, and I know that the Museum of Modern Art has been working on a lot of Hart films, and before that, Library of Congress. But the idea was in our case to select, so for which films do we have the best elements? Let's say an original nitrate print, or maybe even a bad print, even a 16 millimeter print, but nothing else exists elsewhere. And then, because we are members of the International Federation of Film Archives, FIAF, we sent a search for elements email for all of the 9 titles, and we got an overwhelming number of responses. And the thing is, very often it is difficult to identify a film because, for example, here are the title cards from the French release prints of some of William S. Hart films. As you can see, in every single case, the title has the name Rio Jim. So now, William S. Hart plays different characters with different names, but the French decided that he's actually playing the same man every single time, which is not completely, by the way, incorrect, I guess. Those know Jean Renoir's great film from the 30s, The Crime of Monsieur Lange. There is a serial, the French are trying to imitate an American serial novel about Arizona Jim. That's clearly a reference to this. So trying to guess what is the gold mine of Rio Jim and what is the repentance of Rio Jim, which of the American titles it is, and he made more than 70 films, is challenging. Well, the pony of Rio Jim is easy. That's Pinto Ben, the only film where a horse was in the title. But that is tricky, and you cannot imagine how many films in foreign archives are identified with Hart as just The Fugitive. Even a couple of his American films were retitled The Fugitive. But so we were receiving prints and information about prints. And the good thing is, by pure accident, we actually discovered a lost film. Could we look at the next slide, please? Even two lost films. So now our project consists of 11 titles, but this one, His Hour of Manhood, identified as Western Anonimo in the Cineteca Italiana in Milan, is William S. Hart's very first film. And you can see here, we tried to capture the right images. Image on the left, he plays a villain who is unreformed. He's usually a criminal who is actually very good at heart, and he's reformed at the end. No, he gets killed in the film, and sort of he just deserves that. So that was a very exciting discovery. But God knows how many other prints are out there misidentified and maybe essential for our restorations or restorations of our colleagues.
But for Pinto Ben, here are the existing elements and what we're working from to combine all of these prints back into something that resembles what the original release was like. So at the George Eastman Museum, we had a 16 millimeter black and white print of a 1924 Tri-Stone reissue. New York University has an incomplete William K. Everson print, also of this 1924 reissue. Library of Congress, an incomplete nitrate print from a 1917 reissue. And the CNC in France had a tinted nitrate print, which was also incomplete. So here are some of the release dates for Pinto Ben. And the incomplete nitrate print that was at LOC was, like I said, 1917 reissue titled Horns and Hoofs. And here are some of our choices that we had to use for trying to determine which is the best quality, which would replicate the look of the film that had originally. And this is what we're working with through the different timelines. And
as an example, sorry, go ahead.
Like I said, and there were challenges with each of these prints. So
just as an example, if we can go back for a second to the horses, the previous, yeah. So silent films were very rarely black and white, at least not in the 19-teens. As you can see here, there's just one tinted print. It is the one from CNC, the French National Archive. So it is very tempting to select this as a color. But then we learned that specifically for William S. Hart films and many others, but this is not a rule of thumb, the French did not respect the original tinting. They would probably have a foreign release negative or a dupe negative and make new prints and tint them the way they liked. So the colors in the French release, and I think the Italian release prints as well, of William S. Hart films are not authentic. So we had to ignore them. And when we consulted documents both in the US Library of Congress and in France, we learned that it was different all the time. But in the mid-19-teens, when Pinto Ben was made, William S. Hart's films were black and white, with the exception of outdoor night scenes, which were all tinted blue because they couldn't really film at night. So whenever we didn't have an original tinted print, and I don't think we never had a tinted print for those mid-19-teens films, we had to recreate that tinting because otherwise the night scenes would look like day scenes. So with this, let's move on to the next one, please. So another challenge, and it's not so easy to see here, is that the prints, particularly the 16 millimeter prints, and the two on the bottom are 16 mil, are actually cropped and very often cropped differently, so you don't get the same image. Let's look at it closely in the second next image here. So if you look, for example, at the this maybe can you go back for a second to the one with the two images? Go back, yeah. So if you look on the right side, you can see one more sheep head in the center right side. And also the left side is a little bit more cropped in the black and white image. And the same goes for the very top. You can actually see an extra floor of the building in the tinted print. Now let's look even more closely in the next image. Next slide. So you see, so we're losing. So if we were to use the this black and white cropped print, we would lose some images. And specifically for this shot, we selected something where we had both and we could compare. But in some cases, all that we have is actually a cropped print for a certain shot or a certain scene or a certain fragment. And if we just put them together, so let's say we had 6 different elements, and we have a little bit of the French print, a little bit of the American nitrate, a little bit of the 16 millimeter reduction print, and we put the jigsaw puzzle together, and the narrative-wise, it's all perfectly fine. Let's see how it looks, how it would look in motion. So here is a little clip. Look at the edges. See, it's moving all the time. It's very disturbing. And it distracts you actually from enjoying the the narrative and the image quality. And also you can see here maybe that some shots are very sharp, some like this one are very scratched and pretty flat. So what we could do in order to avoid this, we could just take the most complete print, which I think was a 16 millimeter print, and it would have the same aspect ratio, but A, it will all be cropped like this. B, it will not do justice to the cinematography. And I think it's always important, and in some films it's essential. So what we decided to do, and I'm not saying this is the absolutely 100% perfect decision. There are no perfect decisions here. We decided to crop everything, at least to make it consistent. So now let's look at the cropped version of this. No, that's the same one. So here, at least, we're not distracted by this movement on the edges. But it is important to know that we're losing something. We're losing a part of the frame, which is very important. I think in this case we made probably the right decision, but that is very important to document it. And that's why archives have those sometimes very long, I prefer to have them fairly short, introductory cards saying that this was compiled from 4 different prints, a French release print, an American release print, a crop print, because this tells the audience what you're seeing is not the authentic, 100% accurate replica of the original. It is our reconstruction. If something is wrong, we are responsible, not William S. Hart.
And we have that same problem with when it comes to the titles of the films. It's like, what do we have? We don't have an original release title. We have the reissue title from 1924. We have a reissue title from 1917, and we have the French title. So in this case, because all the intertitles that we had in English were derived from the 1924 reissue, we went with those. So we're using the Tri-Stone reissue main titles, and then for the intertitles, we're using the ones with the rope frame. Now, as you could see, the 16 millimeter print from the George Eastman Museum has the entire image of the rope, but it is kind of fuzzy. It's not very clear. The 16 millimeter print from LOC is much clearer, but it is cropped. The 1917 nitrate of the horns and hoofs is a completely different style. And then, of course, there's the French. So we had to make our choices of what we're going to use for the titles. And because of the clarity of the 16mm print from LOC, that was the choice that we made, even though it is slightly cropped. At least the text is all there and it's clear and the detail is good.
I think you have this we have this in the next image, actually, a close-up of them. Yeah. So you see that the one on the left, you can actually, well, again, in the presentation, not so well, but on the big screen, you can see the details of the rope. It does look like rope, not just like a line drawn with chalk. And by the way, this is based on a poem written by William S. Hart, and there is actually an audio recording, even too, if I'm correct, of him reciting this. And let's look for a couple of minutes on another William S. Hart title, Night of the Trail, which was one of the first things we preserved. And in fact, we have a lovely looking nitrate print, which happens to be a 1923 re-release made in the US, an official re-release because there are lots of pirated ones, of a 1915 film. So we preserved it and we showed it at festivals and it looked lovely. And when we started doing this restoration, just in case, we decided to check with the other archives. First of all, we were able to locate 21 prints of this film. And every single time when another unidentified William S. Hart film shows up, and they do all the time, we pray that that is not Night of the Trail, because we're a little bit tired of that, although we would love to replace one image, which I'll talk in a minute. So out of those 21 prints, and they're all over the world, we ended up using 4. Fortunately, no late black and white 16s. One of them was the Kodascope print, just like what was used in the beginning. Anthony mentioned it when he talked about The Lost World, and then 3 nitrates. So the image quality was all nice. And what we learned is that our film, our print, which is considered to be the canonical print, is incomplete. Some of the shots are rearranged, some of the shots are missing. Now we feel it's more or less complete. Does it look completely authentic? I don't think it does, even though we believe that the narrative is all there. And let's see why. Let's look at a clip at the very beginning of the film. This is from our print, scanned from a 35mm nitrate print.
There we go.
Yeah. See what happens? It's extremely blurry. It is cropped. It is a 16mm print, but it looks like a 8mm print. And then again, we're back to the nitrate.
Yeah.
So to our huge surprise, the only print that had this opening shot, and the opening shot is one of the most important things for any films, was a very bad 16mm print, a Kodascope, in the collection of Lobster films in France. And it was at the sort of last stages of decomposition. I think we can stop here with the clip. Yeah, but we see some decomp, by the way, which we were not able to replace with anything because we don't have any better sort of images for that section. So the 16 print was at the last stage of its life, and the email we got from Serge Bromberg from Lobster was that you can borrow the print and you can either use it in the restoration and make a salad out of it because it smells vinegar. That's the sign of decomposed safety elements. In fact, they were not even able to ship it to us. It was scanned. We got the files, and it had to be destroyed. So now this footage exists only in our restoration, in the digital files, and we are about to do film out if we didn't do it already. So we try to, and we usually successfully, to return back to film with our restoration projects, as it is the most reliable and the most authentic medium for long-term preservation. So here's the thing. So still, would we call this a definitive restoration? I don't think so, because I do hope, even though we are a bit tired of Night of the Trail prints showing up, that someday we'll find a print with the authentic opening image. Good image quality and not cropped.
One of our most recent and well-known projects, reconstruction projects, was of Todd Browning's 1927 production of The Unknown. And this is one that the preservation team was working on for over 5 years. And we're very happy to see it getting so much attention. So the story of The Unknown is like the restoration would not have been possible if it wasn't for these two men, Henri Langlois of the Cinémathèque Française and James Card of the George Eastman Museum. By the 1960s, any good 35 millimeter elements for the unknown were considered lost. There might have been one left at MGM that had gone up in the fire that also claimed London After Midnight. So it was considered lost, although it really never was a lost film, even though no American archives had any copies of it. That's because in the 1920s, Pathé had licensed The Unknown for their Pathé Baby library of films. And like the Lost World, it was trimmed a little, so it wasn't complete, but there were always 9.5 millimeter versions of The Unknown floating around, and some of them were blown up to 16 millimeter. I've looked at a 16 millimeter print, and it matched. We have a nitrate print. Henri Langlois at the Cinémathèque Française had a 5-reel nitrate print of The Unknown that matched these 9.5 millimeter prints. And I believe that that was the master to make these reduction prints for it. There is a story that is probably apocryphal that Langlois had promised Card the nitrate, and he couldn't find it because it ended up in their room of films that are listed as unknown, and it took him a number of years to find it. Whether that's true or not, it's a good story. But the print eventually did arrive at the museum, and safety copies were made, but they were in French. Luckily, the continuity still survived. So MGM borrowed the film so they could have a copy of it, and they made these new English language titles in the 1980s using the cutting continuity. So they had at least the original text of the film. And here's an example of the cutting continuity. This is a document that's made after a film is finished. So it lists every shot in the film, whether it's action as a scene or whether it's a title. And it will tell you, it will list it completely, how long the scene is, what the color of the scene is, the exact text of it, a description of the shot. This, you couldn't ask for a better roadmap for this. So we had this French print and then we had new prints with the English titles, but they were not in the style of MGM titles of the 1920s. So we decided we might try, creating new titles more in that style. And this was a project I was assigned to back around 2008. And it did not come to fruition at that time. And even though I was disappointed then, it was lucky that we didn't go ahead with it, because in 2016, Paulo Kirkiusai, then the senior curator of the Moving Image Department, learned of another print at Goss Filmophon, and that Paulo got in touch with you, Peter, if you want to take over this part of the a little bit.
I wanted to also point one thing. Could you go back one slide for a second, please? Yeah, so if you can see, there is a little logo sort of at the very bottom of the two bottom titles. You can see it more clear on the right one, which says George Eastman Museum and what are the years, 2022. So that's a very important thing, because even though we think that the font is very close to the original, and we think that the text is authentic, yet this is not the authentic title. It's our reconstruction. It's our recreation. So that's what the archives do, if they're doing it ethically and diligently, again, to mark, like you would do in restorations of a building, for example. And there are, the code of ethics of many, in many art forms, to make sure that people do not, take this for a complete authentic version. Again, it is very important not to try to fake anything. Yeah, with this, let's look at the Czech titles in the next one. Yeah, by the way, mind the spelling of Todd Browning in the right name in the right image, and Joan Crawford, and she had to be in the Czech name had to be changed, like Marilyn Monroe is Marilyn Monroe in the Czech Republic. So the thing is that the nitrate print was probably captured by the Germans somewhere in Europe, well, in Czechoslovakia, I guess, during the World War II, then by the Soviet troops from Germany after the end of the war in 1945, and then it was repatriated to the Czech Republic. And so what we had at Gus Filmfond, I was working there at the time, was a duplicate, but fortunately for us, the Národní filmový archiv, the Czech film archive, which, as you might remember, had that important print of The Lost World, tries to save the nitrates. So they had the nitrate print in very good condition, which we could borrow and compare with the French one, which we now have.
And it was great. Most of the scenes that were missing from that French print were in the this Czech print, and it fit beautifully as a puzzle. In fact, let's see. We also had a cue sheet, which you could see lists that it was in 7 reels and 5,470 feet. So we knew what the original length was of it. And here's the video of a side-by-side of the French print and the Czech print, and showing you, these scenes that had not been seen by audiences for decades. And when we put the film back together, we're only missing 5 shots. Everything else is back in the film more or less complete. And what it did was also, it fleshed out the story a little more. It gave it some more breathing room. It was never a long film. Originally, it was only about 65 minutes. And the French version was only running 49 minutes. So we were able to restore the film back to about 64 minutes in time. And like you'll see with these circus scenes, that it just makes it a smooth film. You could see the original editing scheme of it, where for years, I mean, it was always a good film. People loved it, but it just had a choppiness that would not have been seen in American release prints at the time. I mean, Kevin Brownlow wrote in The Parade's Gone By that at their worst, the American silent films were at least competently made. And there was something just a little off with The Unknown in the way it was just so choppy. You didn't have any of these audience reaction shots. So let me just pop in a little more, like with the knife throwing scene, where it's cutting back between Lon Chaney throwing knives with his feet at Joan Crawford to the audience's reaction of all this, that it finally just made it smooth. And yeah, nice complete version.
Yeah, the French, they only kept sort of all of the shots that were essential for the narrative. So they kept the story, but not the film. And actually, some of the best acting from Lon Chaney is when he is not hysterical, when he doesn't try to kill somebody or plot something. He was really a wonderful actor, not because he was a man of 1,000 faces and master of makeup. And that was missing from the French print. And Joan Crawford, by the way, wrote in her memoirs that Lon Chaney was the one who showed her for the first time the difference between just being filmed and being a real actor in cinema. I think that in the Reconstruction you can see that. And by the way, there are also shots that are missing from the Czech print and are present only in the French. And the French is a slightly better image quality.
Yes.
So here the puzzle really came together perfectly. Now with this one, we're lucky that, as you can see, the images on the left and the right, when we have both of them, they're identical. Because both of these prints were made from the same negative. And by the way, we're pretty sure that they were made from the foreign release negative, because in many parts of the world and in different historical eras, multiple negatives were made. Either because we can stop the video here, because the film was shot with 2 cameras, sometimes with 3 cameras, and then you could alternate the takes in a different manner, or you would have several takes in a row and then select the best one. And when you knew the taste of your audience, if this is for an American release or for the French release or for any specific European country, you might change. You might have a different take. So sometimes when you're working, when you have an incomplete film and the two incomplete or three incomplete or four incomplete versions are from different negatives, that's a big challenge. So let's look at the next slide. A good example of that. We took, I mean, this is, we participated in this restoration, but it was carried out by the San Francisco Film Preserve, Rouben, the Dragon Painter, a very important 1919 film with Sessue Hayakawa. So this is the exactly same scene. Don't look at the image quality because the images haven't been graded, but just look at the framing. It's completely different. It's a longer take on the right. Or let's look at the next image as well, also from the Dragon Painter. And again, tinting, they were all tinted differently, which is also interesting. So our print was a French print, the one on the right, and the iFilm Museum is a Dutch film archive. It was a Dutch release print. Again, the framing is different and sort of the acting is different. It is the same action, but the acting is different. And in some cases, you would have usually two negatives, but three negatives, four, five existed. And the versions could be quite different. For example, for one of the greatest films of silent cinema, Murnau Sunrise. They look like different films because Murnau wanted them he wanted to adopt them to a different audience, a different mentality. So when you have something like this, that becomes a very big challenge. And what do you do? What kind of an ethical decision do you make? Because suppose you don't have a scene in this print made from the A negative, so-called A negative, and that one is missing a scene, had the scene from the B negative. You can't put it back together. But it is not a perfect solution because you are combining shots that were never intended to be combined by the filmmakers. They chose otherwise. They selected this shot for the French release, this one for the Dutch release or American release. So we are sort of joining the filmmakers crew, and nobody invited us. I'm not saying it's a sin because again, it's important to preserve the negative. Is if a very important storyline is missing and you just don't get anything, it is better to get that storyline. But again, film is not just storytelling. It is a visual art. So again, for something like this, it's very important at least to very clearly indicate what you merged and how you merged it. And that the ideal solution usually will take one print as your main source and fill the gaps with the other one. You don't choose the best shot from here and the best shot from there because you're not the editor. And unfortunately, sometimes archives do that, and that's wrong. That's wrong. That's one thing we're sure about. Let's look at the next one.
Is the
Please.
Black Pirate excerpt from 30 Years of Motion Pictures, which was a film that came out in 1927 that was a showcase of the first 30 years of movies from the 1890s up to, at that time, present day of the mid-20s. And they had in it one section of different color processes to show off how far movies had advanced and now that they could actually have natural color cinematography. And when they had this excerpt from The Black Pirate, it was in Technicolor process number 2, cemented positives, which had very unstable dyes, and the blue-green dye was usually always would fade away in that process, leaving an orange print. Now, for the clips that they used from The Black Pirate were from the domestic US version, the A negative, and which hadn't been seen for years at that time. But because they were faded, we were wondering, it's like, well, this is a film that was to show off the best of movies. What do? We knew that the BFI had restored the film from B and C negatives. So I was like, well, we could contact them and you'll see, run the clip and you'll see the difference in between the faded A negative and the BFI working from the B and C negatives, which are different angles, sometimes different takes, but the color was good. And then this was one of those situations where we had to say, well, because they're showing off what the technology is, it's better to go with the film that has the better color to give a better idea of what 30 years of motion pictures was like to audiences back in the late 20s.
And so the differences in color. can be sort of less dramatic than here, than the one we see here. This is just faded really, but still quite interesting. So let's look at the next slide. I'm using this time an example from Gosfilmophon from the Russian archive, my previous job. This is from an early Russian film based on a story by Anton Chekhov. And by the way, the actress is Olga Baklanova, speaking of Todd Browning, the star of Freaks and The Dogs of New York, still sort of a young lyrical actress at the time. So two nitrate prints exist. As we mentioned, silent films were usually tinted. Tinting is, as you see, slightly different here. We can make a decision, but they're sort of close. Let's look at the next one. More different here. Let's look at the next one. Even more different here. And let's look at the next one. So the colors are completely different in these two prints. So which one do you choose? How do you make the decision? Well, in this case, we're lucky because let's look at the next slide. We can look at the edge codes, which provide information about the print. So the left one is on Agfa stock, German Agfa stock from the 1920s, whereas the one on the right is on Eastman Kodak stock from 1916. And that's very easy. And even if we were not able to date the Agfa stock, because we can based on the size of the letters, that's how far film identification has gone by now. You can, if you learn history, film history, then you would know that in the 19-teens, Russian Empire was at war with Germany, of course, so they were no longer purchasing any German film stock. So the film stock was all purchased from the United States. So it's natural for a 1916 Russian film to have American film stock, whereas in the 20s, the relationship of USSR with Germany was much better than the one with the US, so they would print it on German stock. Things like this are all very important to identify films. Let's move on to the next slide. What if you do not have a color reference? What if you have the black and white color separation negative? And negatives for color films in the 1930s and 40s were usually black and white. Well, at least in the Technicolor system and the Russian one, which was probably stolen from Technicolor. So you have the three color records here, and you can, let's look at the next slide, you can use something like Photoshop, basically, to put them together and get an image, which looks nice. Let's move on to the next slide. And this is how the film was restored back in Russia, the animation film from 1937. That's how it was screened on television and on festivals until fairly recently. Several frames, only frames, of the original print were found. Let's look at the next one. Next image. Yeah, and maybe now at the comparison, the next one. So you see the colors are completely different. And frankly, I don't think that the job we did back then at Gosfilmophon was a good job, because even if you don't have a color reference for this film, you might have a color reference for another film made at the same lab, by the same company, and you would know what kind of threads they would use and what kind of blues they would use. Besides dye transfer prints on nitrate, they don't really fade. They don't fade too much, unlike, let's say, Eastman color or tints in tinted films. And exactly the same thing happens with Technicolor, the system that was used in the United States and most of the world. So let's look at an example from Technicolor.
Well, here's Becky Sharp, which is our opening night film for our Nitrate Picture Festival coming up in the end of next month. And Peter, you're saying these are two British prints of Becky Sharp from 1936?
Yep.
And one of the things with Technicolor is that when you make one print, you can make a print a week later, and there are these differences in the color, which you could see here, where the one print has more of a greenish cast than the other is more natural looking. And that happened all the time. So it's very hard sometimes to get, see two Technicolor prints made at about the same time that will look completely different. And they knew that at Technicolor, and they would pile all their yellow prints together and all their red prints together to make a print that looks at least consistent throughout all the reels. And these two prints are now at Gosfilmophon, you were saying?
Yeah. Yeah. So ideally, what you do is, you try to access, as for Technicolor, as many original prints as possible. Try to see, if you have an American print rather than a British print, 1935 rather than 1936, and compare as many as possible. And of course, when it's a popular film, even from Becky Sharp, I'm aware of at least at least five nitrate prints. That gets expensive. Shipping them, and comparing them. So it's tricky, and the archives very often cannot afford that. But just to make sure that very often what we're doing is we're reproducing a print, not the film. But maybe that's not such a bad thing because there was no such thing as the look of a film, especially in color. That's a good example. And Anthony, let's look at the next one.
So here's a close-up of Fay Wray from the 1933 film, The Mystery of the Wax Museum. The upper two images are from two different nitrate prints. The bottom left is from the 2005 DVD, and the bottom right is the 2019 restoration undertaken by UCLA. They had restored the film back in the 80s when they only knew the existence of one print because the film was considered lost until Jack Warner's personal print surfaced in the early 70s. Then a French print surfaced in later on, and they were using that to fill in gaps that were missing from Jack Warner's print. So you can see the two different colors there. The image that was made from the DVD is somebody, when they were putting it on, decided to color correct it, and anything that was green was turned blue, which is a color that could not be photographed in two-color Technicolor. There was no blue record, so you couldn't. That completely distorts the look of the film. The new restoration is much closer, but it still doesn't quite get there and to what it was, and they're aware of that. And that restoration, the last restoration that was done, was I think only done on video. It's all digital. It's I don't think they've made any new film prints, and in digitally doing it, you can get much closer to the color than you could ever if you printed this back out onto film. It's very, very hard to replicate the Technicolor look, if not downright impossible to accurately.
The very important thing is that not only is UCLA aware that it is very good but not perfect, but this is actually from a publication made by them, by Scott McQueen, who did the restoration. So it is very important for the archive to acknowledge that we tried to make it as perfect as possible. We reached a certain point and we cannot get any further with the current means. And when archives are very upfront about this, we try to be, UCLA tries to be, and many others, that's the way to go. Again, the one thing is when I really hate when somebody writes that we finally restored the film, now it's completely authentic. I would say it never will be. You can never make the exactly same print on exactly same film stock, which is nitrate for most films, maybe from 1952, in the same lab, with the same cinematographer, with their mindset of 1951, not 20, 25, 74 years later, if they're still alive. That's impossible. We can only try to come closer. And for a final example, so that you wouldn't think that the challenges are only there in silent films and in early sound cinema, here is a classic film from the 1950s by the great Swedish director Ingmar Bergman. So Swedish films were known to be very racy in the United States. Don't play it yet, please. So when Bergman's films were released in the US, people who wanted to see more sex on screen rushed to see them and didn't find much, frankly. And in one of his earlier films, actually, there were some racy images inserted by American distributors. Well, Summer with Monica is about a topic which is somewhat daring. A young couple are living a remote island and mainly indeed enjoying sex, which is not shown on screen. And then they have to return when she's pregnant and to an adult life. So let's look now at the clip, just the image without the sound, so we can focus on the challenges. So first at the let's play it. Yeah. So this is the Swedish original Swedish version, restored by the Swedish Film Institute from the camera negative. And so they've been drinking, and now they are kissing, and where the Americans would expect to see something more indecent, there is a fade out. Now, the print that we have, which is the American distribution print, which is supposed to be censored, as many films were in the US, apparently looks somewhat different. No, I'm sorry, that's the same one. Here's the US print. So the same shot, and let's look at the difference. Don't look at the image quality. It's a raw scan just to see how the narrative changes. So somehow the liberal Swedish censorship cut this shot, but it made it into the American print, which is, by the way, a very imperfect print with several shots badly and tastelessly re-edited and massacred. But we have that. And the Swedish archivists were not aware of that. Neither was the actress herself, the great Harriet Andersson, who said that in an interview 10 years ago. Why did they consider somebody with Monica a racy film? We didn't even have naked breasts. So even she didn't remember it. But you see, so things could be found even in much newer films. It's much more difficult to cut sound films than it is to cut silent films, but they were changed. And one never knows where a discovery could be made. And then again, there is an ethical challenge. Do we put this back into the Swedish version or not? Because the Swedish audience never saw it this way. But that's a question for those who restore it. Maybe we'll do it together with the Swedish Film Institute. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you. Stop sharing. You're muted, Emma.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, no, that problem.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Peter. Thank you, Anthony. This was really exciting to see the different challenges that you face when reconstructing film. And we did get a couple of questions throughout the lecture, so I can moderate that portion for you both. We have a viewer from San Francisco Bay. Hello. She asks, is the Eastman House sharing any of these films to the upcoming cinema Ritrovato in Bologna this summer? I ask because we're planning to attend as tourists.
This summer, we always show something in Bologna, I think. The Unknown was shown before in Pordenone, another silent film festival. I think we're showing something, not these films, because, we can suggest them to the festival, but they select them based on their programming. I think we'll have probably a big William S. Hart series when we're done with all 11 films. Currently, we're about maybe even more than halfway through. And that will probably be shown there and elsewhere. But not this year in Bologna, but there will certainly be films from our museum.
Thanks, Peter. Another question, can AI complete the cropped frames?
Anthony, do you want to answer this?
I have not seen any examples of it yet, and I'm holding off because I'm going to be from Missouri on this. You're going to have to show me before I trust it. It's like I don't ride in, driverless cars either. So
Well, I mean, the thing is, technically, yes, absolutely. The question is, how authentic would it be? Because imagine if you have a cropped image, and you don't know what happened there, how the character moved their hand, what kind of a butterfly flew in and out. So I think that probably in several years at least, they could do it pretty well. Like AI could colorize convincingly, but this would not be the authentic decision. So AI has many important uses in film restoration, in some minor, like scratch removal, for example, or in cataloging. But recreating something that is missing, that's a very tricky thing. And I would say that the majority of film archive is very much against that, even though technically it's possible, because that would be cheating.
Thank you both. Another philosophical ethical question: what's the philosophy and strategy around making these restorations widely available to the public once they're complete?
Oh, well. I would, any restoration that we undertake, that if we don't have a distribution system like that in-house, but if any company like Criterion or Kino would get, or Milestone would get in touch with us, we'd happy to make a deal with them to put it out. And like the Criterion license, The Unknown, and put it out on a Todd Browning box set. And we've had other restorations, Three Women, Drifting, all these restorations we've done have gone out onto home video. So
Yeah, and again, I mean, some things we can put online, but that's A, it's very time consuming. B, sometimes there are also copyright restrictions. And I have to say that it is our duty to make sure that nothing is lost, or as little as possible is lost. So with The Unknown, we knew that we should just sit back and relax and see how the film lives a life of its own. And it is still being requested all over the world and being released. And yeah, it has a nice future. Something that we restore may not be as well known, or may even not, let's face the facts, be really good films, but they're historically important. In that case, we try to promote them to make sure that at least they're seen by historians and available in some format. But somebody have to wait until a researcher wants to write about them, because look, the majority of films were, are, and will be bad films. And we're preserving history and art at the same time. They're somewhat separate goals. Sometimes they match, not always.
A question to pull out of something you were just mentioning: will any of the films you guys talked about today be something online or available on our website for viewing?
Well, not at this point, because The Unknown, I mean, it's being streamed by Criterion. They've been sort of sub-licensed by them. William S. Hart, let's see what happens when we're done. Because frankly, yeah, sorry?
Lost World is on our.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. The thing is, I would say that the best thing is for the film to have a proper festival life, to be screened theatrically for a while. And when the audience can have a chance all over the world to see it on the big screen, as it should, then to make it available on home video or on streaming that's what we would like to happen, but whenever we can control that.
Okay, and last question, just since we're right out of time, do you think London After Midnight will ever be found?
Anthony, do you think it will ever be found? I don't know.
I don't think so. I think if it were out there, especially now that it's fallen into the public domain, it would have resurfaced. Yeah, I just think I think the last of it went up in that MGM fire back in the 60s.
You know what? It will be found the moment we stop looking for it. That's what usually happens. And that's sort of the law. That's the rule of thumb. So yeah, just I know very few examples when somebody desperately wanted to find a film and found it. Very few of those. But when something was forgotten for a while, and then all of a sudden it resurfaced, people stopped looking for a complete metropolis many, many, many years ago, and then a print resurfaced in Buenos Aires. So I am not hopeless, but I would not invest in the search.
That's wonderful. Peter, Anthony, thank you so much again. This was just such a wonderful learning experience for us all. If other folks have continued questions here, please send them to info@eastman.org, and we will get those distributed probably to Anthony and Peter, who can continue to help answering some of these questions. But thanks again so much for joining us this afternoon, and we hope to see you at a program soon.